The void between stars had always seemed infinite, untouchable, a darkness that humanity gazed upon with equal parts wonder and insignificance. Earth's telescopes had mapped distant galaxies, detected exoplanets, and listened for signals that never came. For generations, the silence of the cosmos had been deafening, a reminder that humanity might be utterly alone. That silence shattered on a Tuesday morning when sensors at the International Space Monitoring Network detected an impossible gravitational anomaly near Jupiter's orbit. The anomaly expanded, tearing reality like fabric, and through that wound in space emerged something that defied every law of physics. Earth's scientists understood. A vessel, no, a city, of gray metal and brutal angular design materialized in a flash of distorted light. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer Subjugator hung in the solar system like a dagger pointed at humanity's throat, its wedge-shaped hull stretching over 1,600 meters of pure military dominance. Commander Xeris stood on the bridge, his gray uniform crisp, his eyes scanning the primitive blue world that filled the viewport. "Scan complete, Commander," reported Lieutenant Venn from the sensor station. "Single inhabited planet, third orbital position. No hyperspace signatures detected. No energy shields. Primitive satellite network." He paused, checking his readings twice. "They're still using chemical propulsion and nuclear fission." Xeris allowed himself a thin smile. The experimental hyperdrive jump had thrown them wildly off course. Decades of travel from Imperial space, but perhaps Providence had delivered them something valuable. A populated world with resources, completely unaware of the Empire's might, unprotected by Republic treaties or Hutt Syndicate claims. Virgin territory. "Jam their communications," Xeris ordered. "I want every satellite disabled within the hour. Prepare a strike team, standard occupation protocol, and someone find out if they have a centralized government we can negotiate with." He emphasized the word negotiate with the contempt it deserved. In his 15 years of service, negotiations always ended the same way: unconditional surrender or orbital bombardment. On Earth, chaos erupted across every military installation, space agency, and government bunker simultaneously. General Sarah Chen stood in the Pentagon's crisis room, watching satellite feeds blink offline one by one like stars extinguishing. The object near Jupiter, it had moved impossibly fast and was now passing Mars' orbit. Every calculation said it should take months to cross that distance. It had done it in hours. "Someone tell me what the hell I'm looking at," she demanded. A young analyst named Park stepped forward, his face pale. "General, based on trajectory and deceleration patterns, that object will achieve Earth orbit in approximately 6 hours. And ma'am," he swallowed hard, "it's slowing down deliberately. This isn't an asteroid. It's under intelligent control." The room fell silent. Humanity had spent a century preparing for first contact through SETI protocols and diplomatic frameworks, imagining peaceful exchanges of knowledge or cautious mutual observation. No one had prepared for this. A warship the size of a small city bearing down on Earth with clear hostile intent. The UN Security Council convened in emergency session, representatives appearing via secured holographic feeds as traditional communications remained jammed. Secretary General Okafor's voice carried the weight of 7 billion lives. "We need consensus. Do we hail them? Attempt communication? Prepare our defenses?" "Defenses?" The Russian delegate laughed bitterly. "Against that, our most advanced orbital railgun platform would be like throwing rocks at a tank. China's representative leaned forward. Then we must appear united. Show them we're not savages to be conquered easily. Transmit every language we have, every mathematical constant, proof of our civilization. The transmission that interrupted them came in flawless English, Mandarin, Russian, Arabic, and 20 other languages simultaneously. The Empire's linguistics droids had dissected Earth's communication networks in minutes. Commander Xeris's face appeared on every screen, every device, every display across the planet. "People of this world," he began, his tone carrying the casual authority of absolute power. "I am Commander Xeris of the Galactic Empire. Your planet now falls under Imperial jurisdiction. You will cease all military activities immediately. Your governing bodies will prepare for transition to Imperial administration. Resistance will be met with appropriate force. You have 12 hours to signal your compliance. This is your only warning." The transmission ended. Across Earth, billions of people stared at screens in stunned horror. In the Pentagon, General Chen's fists clenched. In Beijing, military strategists began calculating impossible odds. In Moscow, old weapons were pulled from storage. In Brussels, diplomats frantically drafted response protocols. On the bridge of the subjugator, Xeris watched the primitive world spin below, already calculating resource extraction quotas and tribute schedules. The blue planet would submit, they always did, or it would burn. The Galactic Empire had arrived, and Earth's isolation had ended not with wonder, but with the shadow of tyranny. If you want to see more alternate scenarios of galactic powers meeting Earth, hit that subscribe button and drop what sci-fi empire or faction you'd want to see arrive on Earth in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The 12-hour deadline became a crucible that exposed every fracture in humanity's fragile global unity. While the subjugator maintained geosynchronous orbit above the Atlantic, its sensor arrays methodically cataloging Earth's military installations, the world's leaders faced a choice that would define their species' future: submit to an empire they didn't understand, or resist a force they couldn't defeat. President Elena Kozlov of the Russian Federation stood in the Kremlin's subterranean war room, surrounded by generals whose doctrine had prepared for nuclear exchange, not alien invasion. "We have 48 RS-28 Sarmat missiles on alert status," General Volkov reported. "Theoretical range to low orbit with modified trajectories. If we coordinate with American and Chinese arsenals..." "You want to throw our entire nuclear stockpile at something that crossed the solar system in hours?" Kozlov's voice cut through the room. "Even if we could reach it, we have no idea if nuclear weapons would even scratch that hull." In Washington, General Chen was having nearly identical conversations. The Joint Chiefs had run 17 combat simulations. All 17 ended with catastrophic losses. The newest F-47 aerospace fighters couldn't match the velocity of the smaller craft that had been detected launching from the Star Destroyer. TIE fighters performing patrol sweeps that treated Earth's atmosphere like a trivial obstacle. But it was in Geneva that humanity's deepest divide revealed itself. Secretary General Okafor faced a Security Council split down the middle. France and Germany advocated immediate diplomatic engagement. The United States and Russia prepared military contingencies. China remained ominously silent, their military satellite feeds showing unusual troop movements near their Gobi Desert space launch facility. "We cannot appear weak," the American ambassador insisted. "If we surrender without even attempting resistance, We invite occupation, exploitation, possible genocide. We know nothing about these people except that they arrived with warships, not diplomats. And if we fight, the French ambassador countered, we guarantee the death of millions. Look at that vessel. Look at what their technology implies. We might as well be throwing spears at a gunship. 8 hours into the deadline, Commander Xeris received the transmissions. 47 different responses from various Earth governments and organizations. Some begged for mercy, some offered trade and cooperation, some demanded the Empire leave their system. The contradictions amused him. These primitives couldn't even agree among themselves. No unified response? He asked Lieutenant Venn. No, sir. The planet appears to have multiple competing power structures, at least 5 major military forces, dozens of smaller ones. No centralized authority despite their United Nations organization. Xeris nodded slowly. Division was useful. It meant potential collaborators, puppet governments that could manage the tedious business of occupation, while the subjugator secured the system's resources. But it also meant protracted resistance, if not handled decisively. Prepare the demonstration, he ordered. 2 hours before the deadline expired, the city of Jakarta received 30 seconds of warning. Indonesian military radar detected the deployment. A single orbital strike package launched from the subjugator's ventral weapons bay. Evacuation sirens wailed, but 30 seconds was barely enough time to understand what was happening, let alone flee. The turbo laser strike hit Jakarta's financial district with the force of a small nuclear weapon, but without the radiation, emerald fire cascaded from the sky, and in less than 3 seconds, a crater half a kilometer wide replaced what had been the heart of a city of 10 million. The shockwave shattered windows 50 kilometers away. The death toll would eventually reach 300,000. The second strike came immediately after, hitting a remote military installation in the Sahara Desert, a proving ground where the African Union had been testing experimental railgun technology. The installation and everything within 5 kilometers simply ceased to exist, converted to glass and ash. Then the bombardment stopped. The message arrived simultaneously across every communication platform Earth possessed. Xeris's face once again filling screens worldwide. Your deadline has been reduced to 1 hour, he stated flatly. Jakarta was a demonstration of our capability against civilian targets. Your African military facility was eliminated to demonstrate we know exactly where your weapons are. Every ship, every aircraft, every missile silo, we see all of it. You cannot hide. You cannot fight. Submit now, or the next strike will be a planetary capital. The transmission ended with a list of demands: immediate disarmament, surrender of all spacecraft and satellite technology, identification of all government leaders for imperial processing, and cessation of all industrial military production. The occupation framework was already designed, refined through countless worlds the Empire had subjugated. In the aftermath, the world's response splintered completely. The European Union Council voted for immediate compliance, prioritizing civilian survival. Russia and the United States began dispersing their nuclear arsenals and military assets, preparing for asymmetric warfare. China made a stunning announcement. They would negotiate directly with the Empire, independent of the UN framework. General Chen watched Chinese diplomats broadcast their own transmission toward the subjugator, offering cooperation in exchange for regional autonomy, a calculated betrayal that shocked the international community, but revealed a harsh truth. When facing extinction, national interest could override species loyalty. On the subjugator, Xeris reviewed the Chinese offer with interest. The largest population bloc, significant manufacturing capacity, and demonstrated willingness to collaborate. Perhaps this wouldn't require complete planetary pacification after all. Cooperative subjugation was always more efficient than occupation. He had conquered 12 worlds for the Empire. Earth would become the 13th. The only question remaining was how much blood would stain the process. And from Xeris's experience, that depended entirely on how quickly the primitives learned their place in the new order. The deadline clock continued its countdown, and across Earth, humanity discovered that unity was far easier to proclaim than to achieve when survival itself was being negotiated. The hour expired not with surrender, but with silence. No unified response came from Earth's fractured governments, no official capitulation from the United Nations, no grand defiant declaration of resistance. What Commander Xeris received instead was a patchwork of contradictory signals that revealed everything he needed to know about this primitive world. It was divided, leaderless, and ripe for exploitation. 3 hours after the deadline, the first Imperial landing craft descended through Earth's atmosphere. The Lambda-class shuttles touched down simultaneously across 5 continents: Geneva, Beijing, Washington, D.C., Moscow, and, surprisingly, Dubai, where the wealthy Emirates had quietly signaled their willingness to negotiate favorable terms. Each shuttle carried a complement of stormtroopers, Imperial bureaucrats, and protocol droids programmed to establish immediate administrative control. General Chen watched through satellite feeds as the Washington shuttle landed on the National Mall, its boarding ramp descending with hydraulic precision. 20 stormtroopers emerged first, their white armor gleaming in the afternoon sun. E-11 blaster rifles held at ready positions. Thousands of civilians had gathered despite military cordons, some curious, some defiant, many simply paralyzed by the surreal horror of occupation beginning on American soil. The Imperial envoy who emerged was not what anyone expected. Captain Helena Vore wore the gray uniform of Imperial intelligence, her rank insignia modest, but her bearing absolutely authoritative. She surveyed the crowd with cold assessment, then activated a portable holo projector that displayed her image 30 feet tall above them all. "I am Captain Vore, speaking on behalf of Commander Xeris and the Galactic Empire," her amplified voice echoed across the monument-lined grounds. "Your government has failed to respond to lawful Imperial directives. This failure constitutes resistance. However, the Empire is generous to those who demonstrate wisdom. You will assemble your leadership for immediate consultation. You have 1 hour." President Jennifer Walsh emerged from the secured bunker beneath the White House against every advisor's recommendation. She walked across the mall, flanked by Secret Service agents whose hands hovered uselessly near weapons they knew were obsolete. When she stood before Captain Vore, the height difference was negligible, but the power imbalance was absolute. "I'm President Walsh. I speak for the United States of America." Her voice carried across the tense silence. "We've never encountered your empire. We've harmed no one in your territory. Why are you doing this?" Vore's expression suggested the question itself was incomprehensible. "Your planet occupies valuable real estate in a strategically useful system. Your resources, population, and industrial capacity will be assessed and allocated according to Imperial need. These are not negotiations, President Walsh. This is transition management. You may cooperate and retain limited administrative authority, or you may resist and be replaced by someone more pragmatic. Choose. And if we refuse both options? Vor glanced at her datapad. Your capital city contains approximately 700,000 residents within vaporization range. Would you like a demonstration of what refusal costs? The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Walsh felt the weight of hundreds of millions watching this exchange through every available screen. Her next words would define America's response: capitulation or catastrophic resistance. "What are your immediate demands?" she asked, hating each word. "Military stand down. All aircraft grounded. All warships returned to port. Inventories of nuclear and chemical weapons provided within 24 hours. And you will publicly announce cooperation with Imperial Transition Authority." Vor's tone suggested these were generous terms. Before Walsh could respond, the crowd erupted. Protesters surged forward, their chants transforming into roars of defiance. "Don't surrender! Fight them! We're Americans! We don't kneel!" The stormtroopers raised their rifles. Vor's hand lifted in a casual gesture. "Wait!" Walsh shouted, stepping between the soldiers and the crowd. "Stand down! Everyone stand down!" She turned back to Vor, her face flushed with rage and helplessness. "I need time to consult with Congress, with allied nations. You're asking us to dissolve our sovereignty." "I'm informing you of reality," Vor interrupted. "Consultation is unnecessary. Compliance is not optional. You have 1 hour to issue the stand-down order, or we will issue it ourselves by eliminating every military installation on your eastern seaboard. Your choice is not whether to comply, but whether millions die first." In Beijing, an almost identical scene played out with drastically different results. Chairman Wei stood before the imperial envoy and made a calculated announcement that shocked the world. China would cooperate fully with imperial transition protocols in exchange for guaranteed administrative autonomy over its territories. The Chinese military would assist in peacekeeping operations to stabilize other regions resisting imperial authority. The betrayal rippled across diplomatic channels instantly. China had chosen survival through collaboration, transforming itself from potential resistance leader into imperial puppet in a single stroke. In Moscow, President Kozlov made the opposite choice. When the imperial envoy demanded military inventories, she responded by ordering immediate dispersal of Russia's nuclear arsenal to hidden mobile platforms and submarine deployments. The Imperial shuttle barely escaped Russian airspace before S-400 anti-aircraft batteries opened fire, a futile gesture that nevertheless communicated absolute defiance. Commander Zaris watched the divergent responses from the subjugators' bridge with satisfaction. Division was proceeding exactly as predicted. Some would collaborate, some would resist, and the collaborators would help crush the resistors. Earth would pacify itself. "Status of global military assets?" he asked. "American forces holding position, awaiting presidential orders. Chinese military standing down and offering assistance. Russian forces dispersing and fortifying. European Union members divided, Germany and France signaling compliance. Poland and Britain preparing resistance. Approximately 60% of Earth's military capacity remains active and potentially hostile." Zaris nodded. "Inform Captain Vor to accept the American president's compliance. Have our Chinese collaborators provide intelligence on Russian military positions and prepare strike packages for any installation that continues active resistance past the next deadline. Lieutenant Venn hesitated. "Sir, some of our officers have expressed concern about the level of civilian casualties the occupation might require. This world has a population of over 7 billion. Pacification could what, Lieutenant?" Xeris's voice dropped to dangerous quiet. "Could require unpleasant measures? The Empire has occupied dozens of populated worlds. The initial resistance phase always costs lives. But once the survivors understand their options, compliance becomes universal." He gestured at Earth rotating below. "This planet will learn the same lesson every world learns. The Empire is inevitable. Resistance merely determines the body count." On the National Mall, President Walsh stood before billions watching worldwide and spoke words that tasted like ashes. "Effective immediately, all United States military forces will cease hostile preparations and ground all aircraft. We will cooperate with Imperial representatives while seeking diplomatic resolution." The statement deliberately avoided the word surrender, but everyone understood what it meant. America, the world's most powerful military nation, had blinked first. The crowd's defiant chants transformed into screams of rage and betrayal. Some wept. Others simply stood in stunned silence, watching their president negotiate their freedom away to save their lives. But in military installations across the globe, a different conversation was beginning. In underground bunkers and fortified command centers, officers who had sworn oaths to defend against all enemies looked at each other and asked the same question: "If our governments won't fight, who will?" The occupation had begun, but resistance was already being born in the spaces between compliance and courage. The first week of Imperial occupation revealed the brutal efficiency of a regime that had perfected subjugation across 1,000 worlds. Stormtroopers patrolled the streets of major cities in squads of 12, their white armor a constant reminder of Earth's new reality. Imperial propaganda broadcasts replaced regular programming on every network, displaying images of peaceful cooperation in Beijing and Dubai, while carefully editing out the mass arrests in Moscow and the military crackdowns in London. Commander Xeris established his planetary headquarters in New York City, choosing the United Nations building with deliberate symbolism. The blue flag came down, replaced by the gray and black standard of the Galactic Empire. The building's iconic architecture now served as the nerve center for Earth's transformation into an imperial holding, its chambers repurposed into administrative processing centers, where Earth's leaders came to receive their new assignments. General Chen sat in a Pentagon conference room that had been secured by Imperial technicians, a polite term for surveillance installation. Captain Vore stood at the head of the table, her datapad displaying Earth's military assets with unsettling accuracy. "Your nuclear arsenal will be decommissioned within 30 days, Vore announced without preamble. "All stockpiles will be transported to Imperial secure facilities for disposal. Your naval vessels will be retrofitted for resource transport. Your air forces will be grounded, except for units designated for Imperial Auxiliary Service." "Auxiliary Service?" Chen's voice was carefully neutral. "Earth will contribute military support to Imperial operations. Initially, this will consist of infantry battalions for occupation duties on your own world. Eventually, your forces may be deployed off-world as needed." The implication hit like a physical blow. The Empire wasn't just occupying Earth, it was conscripting humanity to help subjugate itself and potentially other worlds. Chen glanced at the Joint Chiefs seated around her, seeing the same barely suppressed fury reflected in their faces. "And if we refuse these assignments?" Admiral Park asked quietly. Vor's smile was thin and cold. "Then we replace you with officers who understand pragmatism. China has already provided a list of military personnel eager for advancement under the new administration. I'm told there's quite a lot of ambition among your junior officers when promotion paths suddenly open." It was a brilliant and vicious strategy. The Empire wasn't just occupying Earth. It was systematically identifying and elevating collaborators who would enforce imperial will in exchange for power and privilege. Every officer who refused orders created an opportunity for someone more compliant to advance. But while the official governments navigated their forced cooperation, a different kind of organization was forming in the shadows. In a decommissioned subway tunnel beneath London, former SAS Captain James Rourke addressed a gathering of 200 soldiers, intelligence operatives, and resistance volunteers who had answered encrypted calls through dark web networks the Empire hadn't yet discovered. "They think we've surrendered," Rourke said, his voice echoing off concrete walls. "Our governments have, sure, but governments aren't people. They're not us." He gestured to the assembled fighters, American Marines who'd gone AWOL, Russian Spetsnaz who'd ignored recall orders, Israeli commandos, South Korean special forces, and civilians who'd decided dying on their feet beat living on their knees. "We can't match their technology," acknowledged Dr. Sarah Kamani, formerly of DARPA's Advanced Weapons Division. She stood beside a workbench covered with fragments of a downed TIE fighter that had crashed during a patrol accident over the Atlantic. "But we can learn from it. Reverse engineer what we can. Improvise what we can't. And we can use advantages they don't expect." She held up a component that pulsed with faint light. "This is their power cell. It's fusion-based, incredibly efficient, but it has a vulnerability. The magnetic containment can be disrupted by specific electromagnetic pulses. Crash one of their fighters, you can potentially crash 10 if they're in formation." Rourke nodded. "We're calling ourselves the Terran Resistance Network. No centralized command. That's how they'll hunt us. Cell structure, independent operations, shared intelligence through encrypted channels. We hit their supply lines, their patrol routes, their collaborators. We make occupation so costly they'll reconsider whether Earth is worth holding." In Moscow, President Kozlov had made similar calculations. Russia's nuclear submarines had disappeared into the Arctic depths, their exact positions unknown even to her. Mobile ICBM platforms moved constantly through Siberia's vast wilderness. When Imperial forces came to decommission the nuclear arsenal, they found empty silos and erased records. The retaliation came swiftly. 3 Russian cities, Volgograd, Yekaterinburg, and Vladivostok, received precision orbital strikes that destroyed military installations with minimal civilian casualties. The message was clear. Resistance earned surgical punishment, but the Empire wouldn't waste resources destroying cities when targeted terror could achieve compliance. Kozlov appeared on state television, her face haggard but defiant. "The Russian Federation does not bow to tyrants, whether they come from Earth or the stars. We will resist with every means available. To our people, endure. To our enemies, you will drown in the vastness of our land before you conquer our spirit." The broadcast was jammed within minutes, but not before it reached millions. Resistance networks across Europe, Asia, and the Americas erupted with renewed determination. If Russia could defy the Empire, perhaps others could too. Commander Zaris reviewed the resistance reports with growing irritation. These primitives should have learned by now. Every occupied world went through this phase. The futile gestures, the guerrilla attacks, the speeches about freedom. It always ended the same way, with compliance or mass graves. "How many active resistance cells have we identified?" he asked. 47 confirmed, sir. Likely 3 to 4 times that number, operating below detection threshold. They're using pre-digital communication methods, couriers, dead drops, one-time codes. Our surveillance networks are optimized for technological societies. They are adapting. Zaris's jaw tightened. Then we adapt as well. Increase stormtrooper patrols, institute curfews in resistance active zones, and identify collaborators within their own populations. Someone always talks for the right price. That night, the first major resistance operation launched in Singapore. A Terran resistance cell infiltrated an Imperial supply depot using forged identification, credentials stolen from Chinese collaborators. They planted modified mining explosives throughout the facility's power distribution network. When the charges detonated, the entire depot went dark, and in the chaos, resistance fighters escaped with crates of Imperial rations, medical supplies, and most valuable of all, 3 E-11 blaster rifles. The theft itself was minor, but the symbolic victory rippled through resistance networks globally. Earth's fighters had struck back, had stolen Imperial weapons, had proven the Empire could be hurt. Commander Zaris stood on the balcony of his commandeered headquarters, looking out over New York's glittering skyline. Below, stormtroopers patrolled streets where humans hurried home before curfew. Collaborator governments enforced imperial edicts. The occupation apparatus was functioning as designed. But he'd seen this pattern before. The quiet rage simmering beneath forced compliance. The way people averted their eyes when stormtroopers passed, not from respect, but from hatred they dared not show. Earth was occupied, but it was not conquered. Increase security around all Imperial installations, he ordered Lieutenant Venn, and send a message to the Executor. Request additional stormtrooper battalions and at least 3 AT-AT walkers. If these primitives want to play insurgent, we'll remind them what the Empire does to rebels. Across the planet, in hidden bunkers and secret meetings, resistance leaders received the same intelligence. The Empire was escalating. More troops were coming. The occupation was tightening. But rather than despair, the news hardened resolve. Earth had faced tyrants before. Fascists, dictators, conquerors who believed themselves unstoppable. History had taught humanity one unshakable lesson. Every empire eventually falls, and the seeds of that fall are often planted by those it underestimated. The Terran resistance was just beginning, and they had something the Empire didn't understand. A world full of people who remembered what freedom felt like and were willing to die to reclaim it. 3 months into the occupation, Earth had transformed into a planet of 2 faces. The official face showed orderly cooperation. Imperial propaganda broadcasts displayed efficient resource extraction. Humans working in Imperial factories, collaborator governments maintaining civil order. The hidden face told a different story, written in sabotaged supply lines, ambushed patrols, and stormtrooper casualties that Commander Zaris's reports carefully minimized when transmitting to Imperial High Command. The subjugator had been joined by 2 additional Star Destroyers, the Enforcer and Discipline, creating an orbital blockade that prevented any unauthorized launches and maintained constant surveillance. Yet even this overwhelming presence couldn't prevent the bleeding wound of persistent resistance that refused to cauterize. In the ruins of Jakarta, still largely uninhabited after the demonstration bombardment, Dr. Sarah Kimani worked in a hidden laboratory that would have seemed impossible to Imperial intelligence analysts. The facility had been a subway maintenance depot, buried 30 meters below ground, its entrance concealed beneath rubble the Empire had never bothered to clear. Here, surrounded by salvaged technology and Earth's brightest minds who'd vanished from official records, she'd achieved something remarkable. "Fire it up," she told her team. The modified railgun hummed to life, its power source a combination of captured Imperial fusion cells and Earth's own electromagnetic research. The projectile, a depleted uranium slug with a modified guidance system, reverse-engineered from TIE fighter targeting computers, launched with a crack of displaced air. 300 kilometers away, a decommissioned satellite Kimani's team had been using as a target simply ceased to exist. Penetration force equivalent to a heavy turbo laser, her assistant Maya Chen reported, checking telemetry. Range approximately 500 kilometers with current power configuration. Recharge time 14 minutes. Kimani allowed herself a grim smile. Not enough to threaten a star destroyer, but enough to make their ground operations very expensive. She pulled up tactical maps showing Imperial supply routes. "We can hit their convoys, their landing zones, their forward bases. Make them understand Earth isn't free real estate." The weapon represented a crucial evolution in human resistance. For 3 months, fighters had relied on improvised explosives, stolen blasters, and guerrilla tactics. Now, Earth was beginning to field weapons that could genuinely threaten Imperial assets, born from the dangerous marriage of two civilizations' technology. In New York, Commander Zeras faced the consequences of that evolution during a briefing that made his already thin patience evaporate entirely. 3 supply convoys ambushed in a single week, a Lambda shuttle destroyed by what appeared to be a ground-based directed energy weapon, 17 stormtroopers killed in coordinated attacks across 4 continents, and most troubling, evidence that resistance cells had cracked Imperial communication encryption on lower priority channels. How are primitives who couldn't even achieve faster than light travel managing to decrypt Imperial standard codes? He demanded. The intelligence officer, a nervous lieutenant named Kessin, consulted his datapad. "Sir, their computer processing capabilities are surprisingly advanced. Not sentient AI, but their quantum computing and pattern recognition algorithms are extremely sophisticated. They've been feeding our transmissions through massive distributed networks, millions of civilian computers working in parallel. It's crude but effective." Captain Vore, who'd remained Zeras's primary advisor on Earth operations, stepped forward. "Commander, we may have underestimated these humans' capacity for technological adaptation. They're not force-sensitive, they have no hyperdrive, no energy shields, but their rate of innovation is extraordinary. 3 months ago, they'd never seen blaster technology. Now they're building directed energy weapons. Then we eliminate their capacity to innovate," Zeras snapped. "Identify their research centers, their universities, their technology hubs. Anyone with advanced scientific training gets cataloged and monitored. Anyone caught with unauthorized Imperial technology gets executed publicly. and I want orbital surveillance intensified on any location showing unusual power signatures. The crackdown that followed was brutal and systematic. Imperial forces raided MIT, Caltech, Oxford, and dozens of other institutions, arresting thousands of scientists and engineers. Some were pressed into forced labor, working on imperial projects under threat of execution. Others simply disappeared into detention centers that made Earth's darkest historical prisons look humane by comparison. But the crackdown had an unintended consequence. For every scientist arrested, a dozen students and colleagues joined the resistance. The Empire's heavy-handedness transformed potential collaborators into committed insurgents. General Chen experienced this transformation firsthand when her own daughter, Captain Lisa Chen, appeared in her office unannounced, wearing civilian clothes instead of her Air Force uniform. "I'm going underground," Lisa said without preamble. "Terran resistance approached me. They need pilots who understand our atmospheric combat doctrine, people who can train others to fly captured Imperial craft." "Lisa, they'll execute you if they catch you. Your entire squadron will be suspect." "Mom, I didn't join the Air Force to help alien fascists patrol our own skies." Lisa's voice cracked with emotion. "You've been to the cooperation meetings. You've seen what they're doing. Those detention centers, the re-education programs. This isn't occupation, it's systematic subjugation. Every day we cooperate, we help them tighten the noose." Chen wanted to argue, to pull rank, to lock her daughter in a bunker until this nightmare ended. Instead, she opened a locked drawer in her desk and pulled out a data chip. Orbital patrol patterns. Every Imperial flight path over North America for the next month. It's all I can give you without exposing myself as the source. Lisa took the chip, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. Don't thank me. Just survive. And when this is over..." Chen's voice broke. "When this is over, make sure there's still an Earth worth saving." The resistance was growing not despite the Imperial crackdown, but because of it. Every arrested scientist, every executed dissident, every family separated by Imperial labor conscription programs created new martyrs and new motivation. Earth's population was discovering something the Empire had crushed out of a dozen other species, the specific kind of stubborn, self-destructive courage that chose death over submission. In the Kremlin's deep bunkers, President Kozlov coordinated with resistance leaders through a network so dispersed and redundant that Imperial intelligence couldn't map it. The Russian nuclear submarines remained hidden, their exact locations unknown even to her, a final deterrent that kept the Empire from simply glassing Moscow in retaliation for continued defiance. "They're requesting our submarine fleet strike the Star Destroyers," her military advisor reported during a secure briefing. "Terran Resistance Central Cell believes a coordinated nuclear strike might damage their shields enough for follow-up attacks." Kozlov shook her head. "One shot only. If we reveal the submarines and fail to destroy those ships, we lose our last strategic asset. The nuclear option remains a final card. We don't play it unless we're certain it wins the game." "Then what do we do?" "The resistance needs support. If Russia doesn't lead..." "We are leading," Kozlov interrupted, "by surviving, by refusing to surrender, by showing Earth that defiance is possible." She pulled up reports from across her territory. Siberian forests where resistance fighters trained in camps the Empire couldn't find. Ural mountain factories producing improvised weapons, Caucasus communications hubs, running encrypted resistance networks. Russia bleeds them slowly. Every stormtrooper we force them to deploy here is one they can't use elsewhere. Every resource they waste hunting us is one they can't extract. We're fighting a long war, not a quick battle. On the subjugator, Commander Zeris stared at casualty reports that no longer seemed quite so manageable. 83 stormtroopers killed in the past month. 4 TIE fighters destroyed. 2 supply depots sabotaged. 6 collaborator officials assassinated by resistance operatives. And now intelligence suggested the humans had developed ground-based weapons capable of threatening Imperial aircraft. "Bring me the Senior Collaborator Council," he ordered. It's time they understood their responsibilities extend beyond administrative compliance. When Beijing's representative arrived, Minister Chen Wei, who'd enthusiastically embraced imperial authority in exchange for continued power, Zeris didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Your intelligence services assured us you could identify resistance leadership within your territories. Yet attacks continue. Supply lines are disrupted. My soldiers are dying to your people's guerrilla tactics." Minister Chen shifted uncomfortably. "Commander, the resistance operates in cells. We've arrested thousands, but for every one we eliminate, 2 more seem to appear." "Then you're not arresting enough." Zeris's voice dropped to deadly quiet. "Or perhaps you're not motivated properly. So let me clarify your situation. For every stormtrooper killed in your administrative zone, we will execute 10 civilian hostages selected from detained resistance suspects. For every Imperial facility sabotaged, we will level 1 city block. You want to maintain your authority? Earn it by pacifying your own population." The minister's face went pale, but he nodded. Collaboration had seemed like pragmatism 3 months ago. Now it felt like complicity in atrocity, but the alternative was losing everything: power, status, potentially his life. Zeris dismissed him and returned to his viewport, watching Earth rotate below with growing frustration. 12 worlds he'd occupied for the Empire. 12 worlds that had eventually submitted. Earth would be no different. The primitives just needed to be taught their lesson more harshly than most. But as orbital sensors picked up another explosion, this time at an Imperial munitions depot outside Cairo, he felt something he'd never experienced in 15 years of occupation duty: genuine uncertainty about whether this world could be held without destroying the very resources that made it valuable. Earth was proving expensive in ways the Empire hadn't anticipated, and the cost kept rising. 6 months into occupation, the Galactic Empire controlled Earth's governments, its infrastructure, and its airspace. What it didn't control, what it was slowly, bloodily discovering it might never control, was Earth's people. The resistance had evolved from scattered guerrilla cells into a coordinated insurgency that operated with increasingly sophisticated tactics and alarmingly effective weapons. Commander Zeris stood in what had once been the UN Security Council chamber, now converted into an Imperial Situation Room lined with holographic displays showing a planet awash in red threat indicators. Each marker represented confirmed resistance activity, ambushes, sabotage, assassinations, and raids that had cost the Empire over 300 stormtroopers and countless collaborators. "Show me the Sydney incident," he commanded. The hologram shifted to display footage from the previous night. An Imperial convoy transporting processed rare earth minerals from Australian mining operations had been traveling along a secured highway when the road beneath them simply collapsed. Not from explosive charges, the engineers confirmed no detonations, but from precisely calculated structural failure. The lead transport plunged into a sinkhole that deposited it directly into Sydney's abandoned subway system, where resistance fighters had been waiting. The ambush lasted 90 seconds. Homemade EMP devices, crude but effective, disabled the convoy's electronic systems. Resistance fighters wearing scavenged stormtrooper armor stormed the vehicles with a mix of stolen blasters and modified earth weapons. They killed 12 Imperial soldiers, captured an entire shipment of strategic materials, and vanished into tunnels that had been mapped and prepared for months. "They're using our own infrastructure against us," Captain Vore observed, studying the tactical breakdown. Sydney's underground network is over 200 kilometers of tunnels. Melbourne, London, New York, Tokyo, every major city has similar systems. We'd need 10 times our current troop strength to secure them all. "Then we seal them," Xeris said coldly. "Collapse every tunnel, flood every subway, destroy every underground access point in resistance-active zones." "Sir, those systems are critical infrastructure for the cities above. Water mains, power lines, communication cables." "I'm aware of what infrastructure means, Captain. The question is whether these primitives are aware of what resistance costs." But even as Xeris ordered the tunnel collapses, he knew it was a band-aid on a hemorrhage. The resistance wasn't just hiding underground. It had woven itself into the fabric of occupied Earth in ways that made extraction nearly impossible without destroying the planet's value as an imperial asset. In the Appalachian Mountains of North America, the resistance had established something unprecedented, a liberated zone. The terrain, dense forests, steep ridges, countless caves, made imperial surveillance difficult and ground operations suicidal. AT-AT walkers couldn't navigate the terrain. TIE fighter patrols couldn't spot hidden camps beneath forest canopy. Orbital bombardment would destroy the very resources the Empire wanted to extract. Captain James Rourke stood on a ridge overlooking a valley where 3,000 resistance fighters trained with captured Imperial weapons and reverse-engineered technology. Former soldiers taught civilians how to shoot. Engineers taught guerrillas how to sabotage Imperial machinery. Scientists worked in hidden labs developing countermeasures to Imperial sensors and shields. Intel reports the Empire's planning to collapse urban tunnel systems, his communications officer reported, handing him a decoded transmission. The Resistance had successfully infiltrated enough collaborator networks that they often knew Imperial plans before they were executed. Rourke studied the report, then called his command staff together. "They're making our argument for us. Every harsh measure drives more people into our arms. Every collaborative government that enforces Imperial brutality loses legitimacy." He pointed to population movement data. "See these numbers. 50,000 refugees fleeing urban occupation zones in the past month alone. They're coming here, to our territories. We're not just a resistance anymore. We're becoming an alternative government." Dr. Kamani joined the briefing, her latest project concealed beneath a camouflage tarp. "Speaking of which, I have something that might accelerate their decision-making." She unveiled what looked like a massive rifle mounted on a mobile artillery platform. "We've been working on scaling up the railgun technology. This fires a projectile at 0.03 light speed, effective range, low orbit. We can't pierce a Star Destroyer's shields, but we can absolutely destroy TIE fighters, supply shuttles, and atmospheric patrol craft. How many do we have? 4 operational, 8 more in production. We're calling them Liberator cannons. Plant them in the mountains, give them overlapping fields of fire, and we can create a no-fly zone over our territories. Rourke felt hope kindle for the first time in months. Do it. Turn these mountains into a fortress they can't crack, without committing forces they don't want to spare. While resistance forces fortified their strongholds, the collaborator governments were discovering that their bargain with the Empire came with escalating costs. In Beijing, Minister Chen Wei faced riots in 6 provinces as imperial labor conscription quotas doubled. The Empire needed workers for off-world mining operations, deportations that everyone understood were death sentences dressed in bureaucratic language. We cannot meet these quotas without triggering mass uprising, he pleaded during a hollow conference with Commander Zaris. The population already views cooperation as betrayal. If we start forcibly deporting millions, then you will face a choice, Zaris interrupted. Enforce imperial edicts and maintain your position, or fail and be replaced by someone more competent. The Empire doesn't negotiate quotas, Minister. We set requirements. You fulfill them. The transmission ended, leaving Chen Wei staring at demands that would make him directly complicit in slavery. He justified collaboration as pragmatism, as choosing the lesser evil, as protecting his people from worse fates. Now he faced the truth. There was no collaboration with tyranny that didn't eventually require becoming a tyrant yourself. That night, encrypted files began flowing from Beijing's governmental networks to resistance communication channels, troop movements, supply routes, collaborator official schedules, deportation lists. Minister Chen Wei had made his choice, but not the one the Empire expected. Across the Pacific, General Chen received the intelligence windfall with grim satisfaction. Her daughter Lisa had been right. Every day spent in false cooperation only strengthened the Empire's grip. But now, from within the collaborator apparatus itself, the resistance was gaining eyes and ears that made imperial operations increasingly transparent. We have confirmed movement orders, she told the Joint Chiefs, in a secured bunker 300 meters beneath the Pentagon. The Empire's bringing in 2 more Star Destroyers and 20,000 additional stormtroopers. They're planning a major offensive against the Appalachian Liberated Zone. Can Rourke's people hold, Admiral Park asked, against a full Imperial assault? No, but they don't need to win. They need to make victory so costly the Empire reconsiders whether Earth is worth the investment. Chen pulled up casualty projections that made the room fall silent. If they commit those forces to a mountain campaign, we're looking at thousands of Imperial casualties, months of grinding warfare, and massive resource expenditure. Every credit they spend here is one they can't spend elsewhere in their empire. You're talking about turning this into their Vietnam, the Army Chief of Staff said quietly. I'm talking about making Earth indigestible, Chen corrected, a world that costs more to hold than it's worth. Every resistance victory, every Imperial casualty, every credit wasted on occupation is a nail in the coffin of their decision to come here. On the subjugator, Commander Zaris reviewed the same operational plans with far less optimism than he'd expected 6 months ago. The Appalachian offensive would require committing 70% of his planetary forces to a single theater. The urban resistance would have free rein elsewhere. Casualties would be significant, and even success would only secure one region. Dozens of others remained contested. There's another option, Lieutenant Venn suggested carefully. The Emperor has authorized in extreme occupation scenarios the use of base Delta Zero protocols. Xeris knew what that meant: complete orbital bombardment until a world's surface was reduced to molten slag. The ultimate solution to persistent resistance, total annihilation. But Earth's value lay in its population, its industrial capacity, and its resources. Base Delta Zero would leave him with a dead rock and an admission of failure. "No," he said finally. "We break their resistance the traditional way. We crush their strongholds, execute their leaders, and deport anyone who won't submit. The Empire has occupied 1,000 worlds. Earth will not be the one that defeats us." But as he said it, looking at the red threat markers spreading across the holographic globe like an infection, Xeris felt something he'd never experienced in 15 years of occupation duty: doubt. Below, on that defiant blue world, millions of humans prepared for the Empire's next move, some in hidden mountain camps, some in underground tunnel networks, some in collaborator offices secretly feeding intelligence to the resistance. They were outgunned, out-technologized, and facing an enemy that had conquered galaxies. But they had something the Empire had forgotten how to fight against: the willingness to lose everything rather than surrender who they were. Earth would bleed the Empire, and if necessary, Earth would burn before it would kneel. The Imperial offensive against the Appalachian Liberated Zone began at dawn with a barrage that turned the sky into a nightmare of emerald fire. 3 star destroyers moved into low orbit, their turbo-laser batteries targeting resistance installations, identified through months of surveillance. Mountain ridges exploded into cascading avalanches. Forest canopies ignited in firestorms that could be seen from orbit. The message was unmistakable: the Empire's patience had expired. Captain James Rourke watched the bombardment from a reinforced command bunker carved into granite 200 meters below the surface. The mountain shook with each impact, dust raining from the ceiling, but the structure held. Earth's engineers had learned from 6 months of occupation. They'd designed these bunkers to survive orbital strikes, using principles borrowed from Cold War nuclear shelters and enhanced with captured Imperial structural reinforcement technology. "Liberator cannons, report status," he ordered into the communication system. 4 responses came back immediately. The mobile railgun platforms had been positioned in concealed mountain valleys, protected by hastily constructed energy dispersion shields, reverse-engineered from captured Imperial technology. They weren't strong enough to stop turbo-laser fire, but they could deflect sensor sweeps long enough to survive the initial bombardment. All batteries operational, awaiting firing solution. Rourke studied the tactical display showing TIE fighter squadrons forming up for ground support runs. 12 craft in tight formation, confident in their superiority, preparing to strafe resistance positions. They had no idea what was waiting for them. "Fire when ready." The Liberator cannons spoke with thunder that rivaled the orbital bombardment. 4 hypervelocity projectiles lanced skyward at a fraction of light speed, their targeting computers compensating for atmospheric interference and TIE fighter maneuverability. 3 found their marks. The Imperial fighters simply disintegrated, their armor inadequate against kinetic weapons moving at relativistic speeds. The 4th shot missed but came close enough that the electromagnetic shockwave fried the TI's control systems, sending it spinning into a mountainside. On the bridge of the subjugator, alarms shrieked as sensors detected the ground-based attack. Commander Zaris stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Ground-based weapons just destroyed our fighter screen? How is that possible? Analyzing debris now, sir, the tactical officer reported. Preliminary data suggests kinetic projectiles moving at approximately 9,000 kilometers per second. The impacts released energy equivalent to tactical nuclear weapons. These primitives have developed rail-based mass accelerators with near-relativistic capabilities. Zaris felt cold rage settle over him. 6 months ago, these humans couldn't reach orbit without chemical rockets. Now they were fielding weapons that could threaten Imperial aerospace superiority. The technological adaptation rate was unprecedented. Redirect orbital bombardment. I want every valley, every cave, every square kilometer of that mountain range reduced to rubble. If they want to hide in the Earth, we'll collapse the Earth on top of them. But as the Star Destroyers repositioned for saturation bombardment, they encountered another surprise. Long-range surface-to-orbit missiles, modified ICBMs with warheads, replaced by electromagnetic pulse generators, streaked toward the fleet. Most were destroyed by point defense turbo lasers, but 3 penetrated the defensive screen and detonated at close range. The EMP pulses washed over the subjugator's shields, causing no structural damage but temporarily disrupting secondary systems. Lights flickered, communications stuttered, non-essential systems rebooted. The effect lasted only seconds, but it proved a terrifying point. Earth could reach the Star Destroyers, and Earth's weapons were evolving. "Intensify shields," Zaris commanded, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "And launch the ground assault. I want every AT-AT we have crushing their defensive positions. Send in the stormtroopers. End this." 20 AT-AT walkers descended via heavy transport, their massive forms deploying across multiple landing zones surrounding the mountain range. The Imperial Army had used these massive assault vehicles to break fortified positions across a dozen worlds. Their armor could withstand anti-vehicle weapons Earth possessed. Their firepower could level buildings. Their psychological impact was devastating. But the Appalachian resistance had prepared for exactly this assault. The terrain that protected them from aerial bombardment became their greatest asset against ground forces. AT-ATs designed for relatively flat terrain struggled with steep inclines, dense forests, and unstable ground. Resistance engineers had spent months preparing the battlefield, identifying choke points, creating kill zones, and planting improvised mines constructed from captured Imperial explosives. The first AT-AT to enter the valley found itself crossing what appeared to be solid ground. The camouflaged pit beneath collapsed under its weight, dropping the walker into a ravine filled with improvised shaped charges. The explosion was spectacular. Captured Imperial fuel cells mixed with Earth-made thermite created a fireball that consumed the walker and its crew completely. Captain Vore, leading the ground assault personally, watched the destruction through her command transport's view screen. "Advance with caution," she ordered the remaining walker commanders. "They've prepared the terrain. Probe for traps before advancing." But caution slowed the assault, and time was something the Empire didn't have. Every hour the offensive stalled, resistance forces repositioned, reinforced, and prepared new ambushes. The mountains that had seemed like a target now felt like a trap closing around Imperial forces. Dr. Kimani coordinated the defense from a mobile command center that moved every 2 hours to avoid orbital targeting. AT-AT column approaching Sector 7, her tactical officer reported. 3 walkers, 2 companies of stormtroopers. Deploy the surprise, she ordered. In Sector 7, resistance fighters had spent weeks preparing something audacious. A modified mining laser, powered by stolen Imperial fusion cells and aimed through a series of mirrors that focused the beam into a cutting tool of extraordinary power. As the lead AT-AT entered the kill zone, the laser fired from a concealed position. The beam struck the walker's leg joint, the vulnerable point that decades of Imperial combat experience had never adequately armored. Metal superheated and failed. The joint sheared completely. The massive walker toppled sideways, crushing 24 stormtroopers beneath its bulk and blocking the narrow mountain pass for the walkers behind it. Target destroyed, the laser crew reported, relocating before they can triangulate our position. General Chen watched the battle unfold through satellite feeds that somehow remained operational despite Imperial jamming attempts. The Resistance had learned to hide communications in the electromagnetic noise of Earth's own technology, radio signals buried in commercial broadcasts, data packets hidden in civilian internet traffic, orders transmitted through video game servers the Empire hadn't thought to monitor. "They're bleeding the Empire," Admiral Park said quietly, watching another AT-AT disabled by Resistance fire. "Every walker lost, every stormtrooper killed. These aren't replaceable assets. The Empire has to ship reinforcements across the galaxy. We're building weapons from their own captured technology." "It's not enough," Chen replied. "We're hurting them, but we can't win this battle. The question is, how much it costs them to win." In the mountains, Captain Rourke was asking himself the same question. 3 days of continuous fighting had cost the Resistance 800 fighters killed, dozens of positions overrun, and 2 of the 4 Liberator cannons destroyed by orbital strikes. But the Imperial losses were staggering by their standards. 6 AT-ATs destroyed, 4 more damaged and withdrawn, over 400 stormtroopers killed or wounded, and dozens of TIE fighters lost to ground fire and the remaining railgun batteries. "We can't hold much longer," his second-in-command reported during a brief lull in the fighting. "They're bringing in fresh troops, and we're running low on ammunition for the captured blasters. The homemade weapons aren't sufficient against their armor." Rourke studied the tactical map, seeing Imperial forces closing the noose around their remaining positions. "We were never going to hold permanently. The objective was to make them bleed, to show Earth that resistance is possible, and to buy time for other cells to prepare." He pulled up evacuation routes through unmapped cave systems. "Begin withdrawal protocol. Scatter the fighters into small groups. They can hunt armies, but they can't hunt ghosts." On the subjugator, Commander Xeris received the casualty reports with mounting horror. 600 Imperial personnel dead or wounded. 8 AT-ATs lost or disabled, each one representing millions of credits and months of manufacturing. Dozens of aircraft destroyed, and the Resistance was escaping, melting into tunnels and forests where orbital bombardment would be useless without destroying the very terrain the Empire wanted to control. "We're winning," Captain Vore reported, her voice hollow. "Resistance forces are withdrawing. We'll control the territory by tomorrow." "At what cost?" Xeris demanded. "We've lost more personnel in 3 days than in 6 months of occupation. Our walkers are destroyed. Our air superiority is contested by primitives with improvised railguns, and the territory we're securing is a wasteland we've rendered worthless through bombardment." He pulled up reports from across the planet. While the Empire had focused overwhelming force on Appalachia, resistance activity had exploded everywhere else. Supply convoys ambushed in Asia, collaborator officials assassinated in Europe, orbital facilities sabotaged by infiltrators. The offensive had been a strategic trap, drawing Imperial resources into a grinding mountain campaign while the rest of Earth erupted in coordinated attacks. "This world is a poison," Xeris said quietly. "Every day we remain, it costs more. Every victory feels like defeat. These humans, they don't fight like any species I've encountered. They lose every battle but never admit they're beaten." Lieutenant Venn approached carefully. "Sir, we've received a transmission from Imperial High Command. They're questioning the resource allocation for Earth's occupation. The Emperor wants to know why a single primitive world requires 5 star destroyers and 20,000 troops to secure." Xeris felt his career crumbling. He'd promised efficient occupation. He'd delivered an insurgency that was spreading like infection and costs that mounted daily. And worst of all, he had no answer that would satisfy Imperial command. No explanation for why these force-blind primitives refused to simply surrender. Below, in hiding places scattered across a defiant planet, resistance fighters regrouped, mourned their dead, and prepared for the next phase. They'd lost the battle for Appalachia, but they'd won something more valuable, proof that Earth could make the Empire bleed. And if they could make it bleed, eventually they could make it leave. The Appalachian offensive had broken the Resistance's territorial stronghold, but it had also broken something far more valuable to the Empire, the illusion of inevitable victory. News of the casualties spread through resistance networks and Imperial ranks alike, creating a psychological shift that no amount of propaganda could suppress. Earth's fighters had proven they could kill stormtroopers, destroy walkers, and contest orbital supremacy. The Empire was no longer invincible. It was simply powerful, and power could be bled away. Commander Xeris stood before a hollow conference with Grand Moff Tarkin himself, the architect of the Empire's most ruthless doctrines. The conversation was not going well. 600 casualties to suppress a single resistance pocket, Tarkin's holographic form stated, his voice carrying the cold calculation that had ordered the destruction of entire civilizations. 20% of your AT-AT complement destroyed or disabled. Fighter losses mounting weekly. Commander, you assured Imperial Command this world would be pacified within 3 months. It has been 8, and your situation reports indicate deteriorating control. The resistance is more sophisticated than anticipated, Xeris replied, hating how defensive he sounded. They're reverse engineering our technology at an unprecedented rate. Their computer systems allow for distributed processing that breaks our encryption. Their terrain provides natural advantages. Excuses, Tarkin interrupted. The Empire does not accept excuses. We accept results. I am authorizing the deployment of an interdictor-class star destroyer to establish a permanent interdiction field around Earth's system. No ship enters or leaves without Imperial clearance. Additionally, you will implement enhanced pacification protocols. Xeris knew what that meant. Mass deportations, public executions, collective punishment for resistance activity, the tactics that had worked on other worlds, but risked turning Earth from a difficult occupation into a permanent bleeding wound. Understood, Grand Moff. However, I must note that the harshest measures have paradoxically strengthened resistance recruitment. These humans seem to possess an irrational attachment to abstract concepts like freedom and self-determination that supersedes survival instinct. Tarkin's expression didn't change. Then you will demonstrate that such attachments are fatal luxuries. You have 60 days to show measurable improvement in pacification metrics, Commander. Fail, and you will be replaced by someone who understands that compassion is weakness the Empire cannot afford. The transmission ended, leaving Zara staring at demands that felt increasingly impossible. He'd occupied 12 worlds successfully. Earth would not be the one that destroyed his career, even if it meant burning the planet to secure it. In a bunker beneath the ruins of Moscow, President Kozlov received very different news. The encrypted transmission came from an unexpected source. Minister Chen Wei in Beijing, now fully committed to resistance after months of collaborator guilt, had transformed into active sabotage. The Empire is preparing mass deportations, Chen's message reported. Lists have been compiled, 2 million people initially, targeting families of known resistance fighters and anyone with advanced technical skills. They're converting cargo ships into prison transports. Destination unknown, but intelligence suggests off-world labor camps where survival rates are near zero. Kozlov closed her eyes, feeling the weight of those 2 million lives. The deportations would break families, eliminate Earth's technical expertise, and create a horror that would echo for generations. But they would also create something else, a point of no return where even collaborators would be forced to choose sides. Transmit this intelligence to all resistance cells immediately, she ordered, and prepare Operation Sunrise. If the Empire wants to escalate, we'll show them what total war looks like. Operation Sunrise had been planned for months, awaiting the moment when the Empire committed to actions so brutal that global unity would finally supersede national interests. Kozlov pulled up the operational files, reviewing assets that had remained hidden throughout the occupation. Nuclear submarines still prowling beneath Arctic ice, mobile ICBM platforms concealed in Siberian wilderness, and most critically, research facilities that had been working on something the Empire hadn't anticipated. Dr. Kamani received the activation codes while working in her relocated laboratory, now hidden in the Amazon rainforest, buried beneath triple canopy that defeated orbital sensors. She'd been expecting this moment since Appalachia fell, and her team had been preparing. Project Equalizer is ready for field testing, she told the Resistance Command Council via encrypted quantum communication. We've successfully adapted their shield technology to Earth-based power systems. The shields won't stop turbo-laser bombardment, but they'll deflect it enough to protect critical infrastructure and population centers. We can make orbital strikes 10 times less effective. How many can you produce? Rourke asked from his own hidden location. We have components for 30 shield generators, each capable of protecting approximately 1 square kilometer, enough to shield major cities, critical facilities, and resistance strongholds. But they require enormous power, nuclear reactors, geothermal plants, anything that can sustain multi-gigawatt output. General Chen had been listening to the briefing with growing determination. The collaborator governments control those power sources. We'll need to either infiltrate their facilities or... She paused, considering implications. Or we convince the collaborators that their own survival depends on protecting Earth's infrastructure. A significant number already want out. Minister Chen Wei's voice added to the conference. The deportation orders have terrified even loyal collaborators. They're realizing that cooperation buys them nothing. The Empire will exploit them until they're used up, then discard them like any other resource. The conversation was interrupted by urgent alerts from resistance scouts across 3 continents. Imperial forces were moving, not in scattered patrols, but in coordinated battalion-strength operations targeting identified resistance cells simultaneously. The Empire was executing a decapitation strike, attempting to eliminate resistance leadership before the deportations began. "They're hitting us everywhere at once," Rourke reported, as explosions echoed in his background. "London cell is under assault. Paris network compromised. We're seeing ATST walkers and heavy stormtrooper presence in urban zones they've avoided since the occupation began." Captain Vore led one of these operations personally. Her hatred for Earth and its stubborn population crystallized into ruthless efficiency. She commanded a strike team hitting a suspected resistance headquarters in the remains of Jakarta, a bitter irony. Crushing insurgents where the Empire had first demonstrated its power. The building collapsed under concentrated blaster fire before her stormtroopers even entered. Standard protocol: deny the enemy any chance to fortify positions. Her troops swept through the rubble, finding exactly what intelligence had predicted: communication equipment, weapons caches, forged identification documents, but no resistance fighters. They'd evacuated hours before the strike. "They knew we were coming," her lieutenant reported. "Someone warned them." Vore's jaw tightened. Operational security was compromised at a fundamental level. The resistance had infiltrated Imperial communications, or turned collaborator sources so thoroughly that surprise attacks were becoming impossible. Every tactical advantage the Empire possessed was eroding. Across Earth, the coordinated Imperial strikes achieved mixed results. Some resistance cells were caught and destroyed, their members killed or captured, but most had warning, evacuating hours or even days before Imperial forces arrived. The Empire was fighting an enemy that seemed to anticipate every move, that melted away from superior force and reappeared where least expected. On the subjugator, Xeris reviewed operational results with mounting frustration. 17 raids executed, 4 successful eliminations, 13 targets escaped prior to contact, estimated resistance casualties, 60 fighters, Imperial casualties, 23 stormtroopers, 1 ATST walker destroyed by improvised explosives. He slammed his fist on the tactical display. "We're trading at near parity with primitives using salvaged weapons." "Sir, there's another issue," Lieutenant Venn reported carefully. "The collaborator governments are requesting security guarantees for themselves and their families. The deportation lists have them concerned they might be included if they're deemed insufficiently cooperative." "Of course they're concerned. That's the point." Xeris pulled up the deportation manifests. 2 million people in the first wave, with quotas increasing monthly until resistance activity ceased, or Earth's technical population was completely relocated to Imperial labor camps. Inform the collaborators that their safety depends on their results. The more resistance fighters they deliver, the safer they remain. But even as he said it, Xeris knew the collaborators were becoming liabilities. Their intelligence was compromised. Their loyalty was transactional. And increasingly, their populations viewed them with such hatred that collaboration was becoming impossible to sustain without constant Imperial protection. That night, the balance shifted irreversibly. Minister Chen Wei made a public broadcast on Chinese state media before Imperial forces could jam the transmission. His face appeared on screens across Asia and through resistance relay networks across the world. "I have betrayed you," he began, his voice breaking. "I collaborated with the Empire, believing I could protect our people through cooperation. I was wrong. The Empire does not negotiate. It does not compromise. It consumes. Tomorrow they begin deporting 2 million people to off-world death camps. Next month, 2 million more. They will not stop until Earth is a slave world, stripped of everyone who remembers what freedom means." He held up data chips. "These contain everything: Imperial troop movements, deportation lists, collaborator identities, supply routes, communication protocols. I am transmitting them to resistance networks now. To my fellow collaborators, you have a choice. Continue serving tyranny and share in its eventual defeat, or join the resistance and fight for the only thing worth having: our world, our freedom, our future." The transmission ended with Imperial forces breaching his office. The broadcast cut to static, but the damage was done. Across Earth, collaborator governments fractured. Some officials fled to resistance territories. Others barricaded themselves in Imperial-protected compounds. The puppet administration that had made occupation manageable collapsed in hours. Commander Xeris watched his carefully constructed occupation apparatus disintegrate and made a decision he'd been avoiding for months. He opened a secure channel to Grand Moff Tarkin. "Sir, I am requesting authorization for base Delta Zero protocols on resistance-concentrated urban zones. Selective orbital bombardment of population centers demonstrating continued insurgent activity. We need to demonstrate that resistance has consequences Earth cannot survive." There was a long pause. Then Tarkin's voice, cold as void. "Authorization granted. The Emperor has determined that Earth's value lies in its resources and strategic location, not its population. Reduce resistance-held territories to examples. Show these primitives what defiance costs." Xeris closed the channel and turned to his weapons officer. "Target selection: urban centers with highest resistance activity, Moscow, portions of London, the Seattle Metroplex. Calculate civilian casualties and collateral damage. Then add 50% and show me the projections." "Sir, those are population centers, millions of civilians. Are shielding insurgents and supporting resistance logistics. The Empire does not tolerate rebellion, Lieutenant. It eradicates it. Prepare firing solutions." In bunkers across Earth, resistance leadership received emergency warnings from still loyal collaborators and sympathetic Imperial personnel who'd been sickened by the deportation orders. Orbital bombardment was coming, targeting major cities in 48 hours. Millions would die unless something changed. Dr. Kamani looked at her 30 shield generators, precious, irreplaceable, and utterly insufficient to protect a planet. "We can save some cities, not all. We have to choose." "Then we choose strategically," General Chen replied, her voice hollow. "Maximum population protection and maximum resistance preservation. We save what we can and make the Empire's atrocities so visible, so documented, that history will never forgive what they've done here." President Kozlov made a different choice. She opened the sealed orders she'd been holding since the occupation began and spoke words she'd hoped never to say. "Activate the nuclear submarines. Target the star destroyers. It's time Earth showed the Empire that even prey has teeth." The final battle for Earth was beginning, and both sides knew that whatever emerged from the fire would be fundamentally changed. The Empire would win or withdraw. Earth would survive or burn. But the age of occupation without consequence was over. The 48-hour countdown to orbital bombardment became Earth's most desperate hours, a frantic race between resistance preparations and imperial ruthlessness. 3 star destroyers moved into firing positions above Moscow, London, and Seattle. Cities marked for annihilation as examples of what defiance cost. Commander Zaris had calculated that vaporizing 15 million people would break Earth's resistance permanently. He was about to discover how profoundly he'd miscalculated. Dr. Kamani's shield generators went online across 27 cities simultaneously, their activation coordinated through resistance networks that had grown sophisticated enough to rival Imperial communications. The shields flickered into existence, shimmering domes of deflected energy that wouldn't stop turbo laser bombardment, but would disperse it, turning instant vaporization into survivable devastation. It was a desperate measure, buying survival measured in minutes rather than seconds. But for populations staring at extinction, minutes meant everything. In the Arctic Ocean, 6 Russian nuclear submarines broke radio silence simultaneously. They'd been running dark for 8 months, their crews living in silent tension, waiting for orders that would likely mean their deaths. Those orders had finally come. Each submarine carried 20 R-39 ballistic missiles, redesigned during the occupation with one purpose: breaking through orbital defenses to strike targets in space. Captain Dmitry Volkov commanded the submarine Severomorsk, positioned beneath the polar ice. He'd spent his career training for nuclear war against Earth-based enemies. Now he was preparing to fire on alien warships that probably thought his vessel was a primitive curiosity, if they detected it at all. All missiles armed and targeted, his weapons officer reported. Firing solution locked on Star Destroyer designated Alpha, the subjugator. Fire all tubes, Volkov ordered, and pray to whatever God still watches that we hurt them enough to matter. 20 missiles erupted from beneath the ice, their thermal signatures blazing across Imperial sensors like a constellation being born. 19 more submarines fired simultaneously, creating a swarm of 120 nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles arcing toward orbit. The warheads had been modified with the Resistance's best understanding of Imperial shield technology, shaped charges designed to penetrate energy barriers, electromagnetic pulse generators to disrupt systems, and raw fusion fury to overwhelm defensive capabilities. On the subjugator's bridge, alarms screamed as sensors detected the launch. Commander Zaris stared at the tactical display, showing missiles climbing toward his fleet, feeling his blood turn cold. These weren't the primitive chemical rockets Earth had fielded months ago. These were weapons designed to kill starships. Point defense batteries, engage all targets, launch all TIE squadrons for interception. He turned to his communications officer. Signal the fleet, evasive maneuvers, and maximum shields. The Star Destroyer's defensive turbo lasers opened fire, filling near-Earth space with emerald destruction. Missiles disintegrated by the dozens, their nuclear payloads detonating in space, creating a field of electromagnetic chaos that scrambled sensors and disrupted targeting computers. But Earth had fired over 100 missiles from multiple vectors, and the submarines had calculated firing solutions specifically to overwhelm point defenses. 17 missiles penetrated the defensive screen. Their warheads detonated against the subjugator's shields in a cascade of fusion fire that lit the night sky across half the planet. The shields held, designed to withstand sustained capital ship bombardment, but they flickered and strained under the concentrated nuclear assault. Secondary explosions rippled across the Star Destroyer's hull as the electromagnetic pulse components fried exposed systems. The Enforcer took 3 direct hits that collapsed its aft shields completely. Exposing the engine section to space, the final missile struck the exposed section and detonated, its plasma core breaching the Star Destroyer's reactor containment. For one terrible moment, a second sun bloomed in orbit as the Imperial warship's power systems went critical. The explosion was visible from Earth's surface, a brief, brilliant flare that announced humanity had just destroyed a Star Destroyer. Resistance fighters across the planet erupted in shocked celebration. 8 months of occupation, 8 months of suffering under overwhelming Imperial power, and Earth had just proven the Empire could bleed in space as well as on the ground. On the subjugator, damage reports flooded in. Shields at 40% capacity, secondary power systems offline. We've lost 60% of our sensor array. Multiple hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. The tactical officer's voice cracked with panic. No one had heard from Imperial personnel since the occupation began. "Sir, the Enforcer is gone. Total reactor failure. Estimated casualties 9,000 personnel." Xeris felt reality shift beneath him. 9,000 Imperial lives. A Star Destroyer destroyed. The primitives had actually hurt them, badly enough that his remaining fleet was vulnerable. If they launched another salvo, "All vessels withdraw to high orbit immediately," he commanded. "Maximum shields, combat alert status, and prepare orbital bombardment of every coastal city on this cursed planet. If they want to strike from the oceans, we'll boil the oceans." But even as he gave the order, he knew it was rage talking, not strategy. Destroying Earth's biosphere would eliminate the planet's value completely. The Emperor would have him executed for such catastrophic resource waste. He was trapped between a failed occupation and an enemy that refused to be conquered. Captain Vore transmitted from the surface, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Commander, the Resistance knew about our bombardment plans. They've evacuated millions from the targeted cities and somehow deployed energy shields we didn't know they possessed. Our demonstration bombardment will kill thousands instead of millions, insufficient to break their morale." "Then we adapt," Xeris snapped. "How many stormtroopers do we have available for immediate deployment?" "Approximately 14,000 planet-wide. Another 6,000 were aboard the Enforcer." The loss of those troops settled over the conversation like a shroud. Xeris studied the tactical situation with growing desperation. His fleet was damaged, his ground forces spread too thin, and the enemy had proven capable of striking assets he'd considered untouchable. For the first time in his career, he faced the possibility that Earth couldn't be held, not with current resources, not against an enemy this adaptable and this determined. In the Appalachian Mountains, where resistance had supposedly been crushed, Captain Rourke emerged from hidden bunkers with 3,000 fighters who'd never actually evacuated. The Imperial occupation forces had been so focused on the nuclear strike that they'd left the recaptured territory lightly defended. Now those positions came under coordinated assault from an enemy the Empire thought was scattered. The remaining AT-ATs found themselves ambushed by fighters wielding weapons that hadn't existed during the first battle. Man-portable railguns scaled down from Kamani's Liberator cannons. powerful enough to penetrate Walker armor at close range. Stormtrooper positions were overrun by resistance fighters who'd learned Imperial tactics and turned them back against their creators. "We're retaking the mountains," Rourke transmitted to Resistance Command. The Empire withdrew forces for the orbital operation. Their ground presence is vulnerable across every theater. If we hit them everywhere simultaneously. General Chen didn't wait for him to finish. "All resistance cells, execute Phase Omega. Full offensive operations across all occupied territories. The Empire is wounded. We pour into the gap." What followed was unlike anything the Empire had encountered in occupation warfare. Coordinated attacks erupted across 6 continents simultaneously. Collaborator compounds were stormed and their remaining officials either arrested or executed by resistance tribunals. Imperial supply depots were raided by thousands of fighters who'd been waiting months for this moment. Cities that had submitted to occupation rose in revolt, civilians joining resistance fighters in overwhelming isolated Imperial garrisons. In Beijing, Minister Chen Wei's sacrifice had inspired exactly what he'd hoped: mass defection of Chinese military units to the resistance cause. Entire battalions turned on their Imperial handlers, seizing weapons and equipment in the chaos. The Chinese government's collapse created a power vacuum that resistance leadership filled immediately, transforming the world's most populous nation from collaborator to insurgent stronghold in hours. Commander Zaris watched his occupation collapse in real time across the holographic displays. Red threat indicators spread like infection. Green zones marking Imperial control shrank to isolated pockets. Communication networks were being overrun. Supply lines were cut. Garrison after garrison went silent as resistance forces swept through them. "We're losing the planet," Lieutenant Venn reported, his voice hollow with shock. 80% of our ground forces are engaged or under siege. The collaborator governments have collapsed completely. We're receiving casualty reports from every sector. The resistance has weapons and coordination we never detected. Zaris knew he faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could commit to total war, base Delta Zero protocols that would render Earth worthless, but prove Imperial power. He could request massive reinforcements, admitting his failure but potentially salvaging the occupation. Or he could do something no Imperial commander had done in living memory: recognize an unwinnable situation and withdraw. "Open a channel to Grand Moff Tarkin," he said quietly, "and prepare the fleet for possible evacuation of Imperial personnel." But before the transmission could be established, Dr. Kimani played her final card. The Liberator cannons that had survived the Appalachian offensive, now repositioned and reinforced, opened fire on the Star Destroyers in high orbit. The hypervelocity projectiles streaked through atmosphere and space, moving too fast for point defenses to track effectively. 3 rounds struck the subjugators' weakened shields. The first 2 were deflected, their energy absorbed by the already strained defensive screens. The third punched through, impacting the Star Destroyer's superstructure with enough kinetic force to tear a 100-meter gash in the hull. Explosive decompression vented 3 decks to space. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically, but the damage was catastrophic and visible. Shields failing, hull breach. We're venting atmosphere. The reports came in cascading panic as the bridge crew realized their invincible flagship had been wounded by ground-based weapons fired from a planet they'd thought conquered. Zaris made his decision. All Imperial personnel, execute evacuation protocol Epsilon. Withdraw to designated extraction points for immediate orbital retrieval. All Star Destroyers prepare for hyperspace jump on my command. We're leaving this system. The order rippled through Imperial forces with stunned disbelief. The Galactic Empire didn't retreat. It didn't surrender. It conquered or it annihilated, but it never withdrew. Yet here was a commander ordering full evacuation from a primitive world that had somehow, impossibly, fought the Empire to a standstill. On Earth, resistance networks intercepted the Imperial communications. The realization spread through fighters, civilians, and resistance command like electricity. The Empire was leaving. After 8 months of occupation, after hundreds of thousands dead, after collaboration and resistance and desperate battles, humanity had won. But the victory was incomplete, fragile, and written in blood. The Empire was withdrawing, not surrendering. And as Xeris prepared his damaged fleet for departure, he made one final transmission to Earth's resistance leadership. You have earned your world's freedom through blood. The Empire did not expect you willing to shed. But understand this. We will report your capabilities to Imperial Command. Earth is now a marked system. You have proven yourselves dangerous. The Empire does not forget, and it does not forgive. We leave now, but we may return with forces you cannot imagine. Use your time wisely. The transmission ended. 6 hours later, the Star Destroyers entered hyperspace, vanishing from Earth's system in flashes of impossible light. The occupation was over. The silence after the hyperspace jumps was deafening. For 8 months, Earth's sky had been shadowed by Star Destroyers, its cities patrolled by white armored soldiers, its future dictated by an empire from beyond the stars. Now, suddenly, humanity stood alone again, bloodied, traumatized, but free. General Chen emerged from the Pentagon's command bunker to find Washington, D.C. transformed. The streets that had been empty under Imperial curfew now overflowed with millions celebrating in delirious joy and relief. Strangers embraced. Resistance fighters were lifted onto shoulders and paraded through crowds. People wept openly, releasing 8 months of suppressed terror and grief. The Imperial headquarters at the former UN building was burning. Its occupants evacuated just hours before resistance forces stormed the complex. But Chen couldn't share the celebration. She stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, looking out at a world that had survived by the narrowest of margins and saw only the staggering cost. Jakarta was still a crater. Dozens of cities bore scars from orbital bombardment. The Appalachian Mountains were a wasteland of scorched earth and unexploded ordnance. Conservative estimates put Earth's casualties at 3 million dead, with tens of millions displaced, injured, or psychologically shattered by occupation. President Walsh found her there, the 2 women who'd navigated impossible choices, standing in exhausted silence before the celebrating masses. "We won," Walsh said, though the words carried no triumph. "We survived," Chen corrected. "The Empire chose to leave rather than commit the resources needed to truly conquer us." That's not the same as victory. It's the only kind of victory possible against an empire that spans galaxies. Walsh turned to face her. "What do we do now?" They could return, as their commander promised, with more ships, more troops, more willingness to simply destroy what they can't control. Chen pulled up data on her tablet, analysis that resistance scientists had been compiling throughout the occupation. We do what humanity has always done when faced with existential threats. We adapt, we prepare, and we refuse to be victims again. She displayed schematics for reverse-engineered Imperial technology. We've learned more about advanced physics, energy systems, and materials science in 8 months than we achieved in the previous 50 years. We have captured Imperial weapons, shield generators, communication systems. Dr. Kimani's team has already begun designing Earth's first genuine energy shields based on what we've stolen. In the Amazon rainforest, Kimani stood in her laboratory surrounded by salvaged Imperial technology and exhausted scientists who'd worked themselves nearly to death during the occupation. They dissected TIE fighters, reverse-engineered blasters, cracked shield algorithms, and developed weapons that had genuinely threatened Star Destroyers. Now they faced an even more daunting task, preparing Earth for the Empire's potential return. The hyperdrive is the critical technology, she told her team, gesturing at components salvaged from crashed Imperial craft. If we can crack faster than light travel, we can explore beyond our system, establish outposts, create strategic depth. The Empire won't expect primitives who barely reached their own moon to suddenly appear with FTL-capable vessels. The power requirements are astronomical, her lead physicist objected, and we're missing critical components. The hyperdrive motivators, the navigation computers sophisticated enough to plot jumps safely. We have the pieces, but not the understanding. Then we develop the understanding, Kimani replied with fierce determination. The Empire gave us a priceless gift, proof that these technologies are possible. We're no longer theorizing about FTL travel or energy shields, or directed energy weapons. We've seen them work. We know they exist. That changes everything. In Moscow, President Kozlov addressed the Russian people from the Kremlin's ruins. The ancient fortress had taken orbital strikes during the Empire's final days. Its walls scarred by turbo-laser fire, but still standing. Her speech was broadcast globally, translated into every language, heard by billions who'd endured occupation. We have survived the first contact with a hostile alien civilization, she began, her voice carrying the weight of shared trauma. We learned that the universe is not empty, that humanity is not alone, and that our isolation was a blessing we didn't appreciate until it ended. The Galactic Empire chose our world for conquest, believing we were too primitive, too divided, too weak to resist. She paused, letting the memory of those terrible months settle over her audience. They were wrong. We resisted, we adapted, we united when unity seemed impossible. We fought with weapons they'd discarded as obsolete and strategies they'd never encountered. And we hurt them badly enough that occupation became too costly to maintain. The camera panned across the assembled crowd. Resistance fighters, former collaborators who'd redeemed themselves, civilians who'd survived bombardments, and soldiers who'd fought against impossible odds. But our victory is incomplete. The Empire knows where we are. They will report our capabilities to their leadership. They may return, and when they do, they will come prepared for the resistance we showed them. Our survival depends on what we do with the time we've been given. She outlined a planetary defense initiative that would have seemed insane 9 months ago. Unified global military command, mandatory technology sharing among all nations, crash programs to develop FTL capability and advanced weapons, construction of orbital defense platforms using captured Imperial technology, and establishment of early warning networks that could detect hyperspace incursions before hostile fleets arrived in system. We entered this war divided, Kozlov concluded. We emerged united by necessity. That unity must become permanent, or the Empire will destroy us piecemeal when they return. Earth must become a fortress, a civilization capable of defending itself among the stars. We've seen what awaits us out there. Now we must ensure we're ready to face it. Captain Rourke stood in the reclaimed Appalachian Mountains, looking out over terrain that bore the scars of two major battles. The Terran resistance had achieved its purpose, proving that occupation could be resisted, that Earth's people wouldn't submit to tyranny, no matter how advanced. But resistance was a reaction to oppression. What humanity needed now was proactive defense. The resistance networks don't disband, he told the assembled cell leaders in a secured meeting. They transform. We become Earth's intelligence and special operations framework, the people who know how to fight asymmetrically, who understand guerrilla doctrine, who can operate behind enemy lines if the Empire returns. But we also share everything we learned with conventional militaries, so Earth has both open strength and hidden capabilities. Dr. Sarah Kamani joined the meeting via holographic link, and we establish research priorities based on captured technology. Hyperdrives first. We need to reach other systems, find resources, maybe even allies. Shield technology second. We make Earth too costly to bombard casually. Directed energy weapons third. We ensure our next defense doesn't rely on nuclear missiles we might not survive launching. What about the collaborators? Someone asked, voicing the question that haunted post-occupation discussions. Millions had cooperated with imperial authority, some from fear, some from pragmatism, some from genuine belief that submission was Earth's only option. Their fate remained unresolved. General Chen answered from her own remote location. Truth and reconciliation, not revenge. We identify those who committed genuine atrocities, who helped with deportations, who tortured resistance fighters, who profited from occupation while their neighbors suffered. They faced justice. But those who simply tried to survive, who cooperated under duress, who eventually turned against the Empire, they get a chance at redemption. We'll need everyone if the Empire returns. The policy was controversial, sparking fierce debate across the planet. Some resistance fighters demanded harsh punishment for anyone who'd collaborated. Others recognized that the occupation had created impossible moral situations where cooperation and resistance weren't clear binary choices. The debate would continue for years, another scar the Empire had left on Earth's psyche. In orbit, cleanup crews worked to salvage the wreckage of the Enforcer, the star destroyer humanity had destroyed. The debris field contained technology beyond Earth's current understanding, materials with properties that seemed impossible, and most valuable of all, intact sections of the hyperdrive assembly. Engineers floated through the wreckage in jury-rigged EVA suits, cutting away pieces of galactic-level technology with tools that seemed laughably primitive by comparison. "It's like cavemen salvaging a fighter jet," one engineer muttered, carefully extracting a hyperdrive motivator the size of a small car. "We barely understand what we're looking at." "Then we learn," his partner replied. "The Empire's biggest mistake was coming here. Their second biggest was leaving before finishing the job. Every piece of technology they left behind, every weapon we captured, every tactical lesson we learned, it's all leverage toward making sure they can never do this to us again." 6 months after the Imperial withdrawal, Earth had transformed in ways that would have seemed impossible before the occupation. The United Nations had been restructured into the unified Earth government, with actual authority rather than advisory capacity. The world's militaries were integrating into a cohesive planetary defense force. Research programs were sharing data freely across former national boundaries. Humanity was beginning to think of itself not as competing nations, but as a single species facing a hostile universe. Dr. Kimani stood in what had been her hidden laboratory, but was now Earth's primary advanced research facility, watching the first prototype FTL-capable vessel undergo final tests. It was crude, a modified spacecraft using barely understood hyperdrive components, held together with human engineering and desperate hope. But when the test pilot activated the drive and the ship vanished into hyperspace, emerging 30 light seconds away, exactly as calculated, the control room erupted in celebration. Humanity had just taken its first faster-than-light journey. How long until we can build these without salvaged Imperial parts? The project director asked. 5 years for true reverse engineering, Kimani replied. 10 years for reliable production. 20 years before we have FTL-capable warships designed from the ground up to Earth specifications. She paused, watching the prototype maneuver back toward the facility. But we're not waiting 20 years to prepare. The Empire taught us that survival requires being willing to fight with whatever weapons you have while building the ones you need. General Chen received regular intelligence reports from the few Imperial deserters who'd remained on Earth, stormtroopers who'd been separated from their units during the chaotic withdrawal, officers who'd grown disgusted with occupation brutality, technicians who'd decided they preferred Earth to serving tyranny. They provided valuable insights into Imperial doctrine, psychology, and probable responses to Earth's resistance. They'll report us as dangerous but manageable, one former Imperial intelligence officer explained during a debriefing. Commander Xeris failed to pacify a primitive world. That's an embarrassment Imperial Command won't want to advertise widely, but they'll note our technological adaptation rate, our resistance capacity, and our nuclear strike on the Enforcer. Earth is now marked in Imperial databases as a potential threat rather than easy conquest. What does that mean for us? Chen asked. It means if they return, they'll come with overwhelming force. Not occupation fleets, but extermination forces. They'll try to neutralize your military capacity before you can develop further. Your window of safety is however long it takes Imperial High Command to decide whether Earth is worth the resources needed to properly subjugate or eliminate. The answer was sobering but not unexpected. Earth had bought time and freedom, but both came with expiration dates. The race was now between humanity's technological development and the Empire's decision timeline. President Walsh addressed the world 1 year after liberation, standing in the reconstructed UN building, now the unified Earth government headquarters. Behind her, the old national flags had been joined by a new banner, Earth's flag, showing a blue world rising above a field of stars, with the inscription, "Never again," in every human language. 1 year ago, we faced extinction or eternal servitude, she began. We chose neither. We fought with everything we had, accepted casualties we could barely survive, and proved that humanity will not go quietly into subjugation. The Galactic Empire learned that conquering Earth costs more than we're worth, at least with the forces they were willing to commit. She gestured to holographic displays showing Earth's transformation, orbital defense platforms under construction, new spacecraft capable of system defense, shield generators protecting major population centers, and most remarkably, 3 FTL-capable exploration vessels preparing for humanity's first interstellar missions. We don't know if the Empire will return. We don't know what else waits among the stars, allies, enemies, or civilizations that make the Empire look benign by comparison. But we know this: Earth will never again be helpless. We will never again watch alien warships appear in our sky with nothing but primitive weapons and desperate courage to defend ourselves. We are building the civilization we should have been when first contact came, united, advanced, and capable of defending our home among the stars. The speech resonated across a planet still processing collective trauma. Humanity had survived its trial by fire, but the scars would take generations to heal. Children who'd watched orbital bombardments had nightmares about emerald fire falling from the sky. Cities rebuilt from rubble carried memorials to millions who died resisting occupation. The psychological wound of knowing humanity wasn't alone, and that the universe contained empires that viewed Earth as property to be exploited, would reshape human philosophy, culture, and identity for centuries to come. But from that trauma came determination. Earth's scientists pushed boundaries that had seemed theoretical months before. Military strategists developed doctrines for defending against threats that could arrive from light years away. Diplomats prepared frameworks for contact with civilizations humanity hadn't yet discovered, learning from the catastrophic failure of first contact with the Empire. In hidden facilities across the planet, resistance fighters who'd become Earth's most experienced soldiers trained new generations in asymmetric warfare, planetary defense, and survival against superior technology. The lessons learned fighting stormtroopers and AT-ATs became doctrine for Earth's Special Operations Forces, and in orbit, construction continued on vessels that would carry humanity's first interstellar missions, not to conquer or colonize, but to explore, to establish early warning networks, and to search for allies or resources that could help defend Earth if the Empire returned. Dr. Kimani looked up at the stars from her laboratory balcony, seeing them differently than she had before the occupation. They were no longer points of distant light representing abstract possibility. They were addresses, coordinates where civilizations lived, empires ruled, and threats might be gathering. Somewhere out there, Commander Zaris was reporting to his superiors. Somewhere, Imperial analysts were studying Earth's resistance. Somewhere, decisions were being made about whether humanity deserved to survive. "Let them come," she whispered to the night sky. "Next time, we'll be ready." Earth had won its freedom by proving occupation was too costly to maintain. Now it raced to ensure that freedom could be defended against whatever the galaxy sent next. The Galactic Empire had arrived expecting easy conquest and found a species that would rather burn than kneel. Humanity had learned a terrible lesson. The universe was vast, hostile, and filled with powers beyond imagination. But it had also learned something the Empire hadn't expected: that a species fighting for survival on its own world, with nothing left to lose and everything to protect, could bleed even galactic tyrants badly enough to make them think twice. The occupation was over. The war for Earth's future had just begun, and this time, when the stars flickered with arriving ships, humanity would greet them not as victims, but as warriors defending their home. The Galactic Empire's occupation of Earth lasted 8 months, 17 days, and cost both sides more than either had anticipated. For the Empire, it represented an unprecedented failure. A primitive world without hyperspace capability, without force sensitivity, without any galactic standing, had fought them to a strategic stalemate that made continued occupation economically and militarily untenable. 3,000 Imperial personnel dead, 1 Star Destroyer destroyed, countless resources expended, and nothing to show for it but the bitter knowledge that conquest wasn't always inevitable. For Earth, the price was measured in millions of lives lost, cities destroyed, and the permanent shattering of humanity's isolation. The blue world that had once gazed at the stars with wonder now looked upward with hard-won wisdom and careful preparation. The occupation had forged something unprecedented in human history. Genuine planetary unity born not from idealism, but from the recognition that division meant extinction. In the years that followed, Earth's transformation accelerated beyond the wildest predictions. The first generation of Earth-built FTL vessels launched within 3 years, carrying exploration teams and early warning networks to nearby systems. Shield technology became standard for all major population centers. Directed energy weapons evolved from reverse-engineered Imperial technology into uniquely human designs optimized for planetary defense. The species that had nearly fallen to galactic tyranny was becoming something the Empire hadn't anticipated, a genuine interstellar civilization capable of defending its sovereignty. But the shadow of those 8 months never truly lifted. Children grew up knowing that monsters could fall from the stars. Every breakthrough in defensive technology carried the ghost of orbital bombardment. Every diplomatic protocol was written with the memory of Commander Xeris's ultimatums. Earth had survived, but the innocence of believing humanity might be alone, or that first contact would be peaceful, was gone forever. Somewhere in the vastness of the galaxy, the Galactic Empire continued its eternal expansion, occupying new worlds, crushing new resistance movements, enforcing order through overwhelming power. Earth was noted in their archives as a strategic curiosity, a primitive world that had cost more than it was worth, at least for now. Whether the Empire would return with greater force remained an unanswered question that hung over humanity like a perpetual sword of Damocles. But Earth was no longer waiting passively for that answer. Humanity had learned the universe's harshest lesson and survived the teaching. Now it prepared for graduation, building the civilization that could stand among the stars not as victims or subjects, but as free people who had earned their sovereignty in blood and would defend it with everything they had become. The occupation had ended, but Earth's true journey was just beginning. A journey into a galaxy far more dangerous and wondrous than humanity had ever imagined. Armed with the knowledge that freedom's price was eternal vigilance and the willingness to fight for it against any enemy, no matter how powerful they seemed. May the Force be with you. More stories await.